and welcome to the show. I'm Peter Whittle. Now, recently on the platform, which is called Courage.media, which is run by Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who you might remember was the lady who gave our Smith Lecture this year, a new investigation has just been published about how Islamists infiltrate and influence the government. And it's written, I'm pleased to say, by my guest today, Connor Tomlinson, who you obviously know from Tomlinson Talks on Lotus Eaters. Also, he's co-host of Deprogrammed. And, increasingly writing for all sorts of different people, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm a bit of a workaholic, Peter.
Yeah. So how do you actually manage to push it all out?
Endless coffee, little sleep. And also, my conscience feels racked the more I learn by just how bad this country's being run. So I sort of just needed to get it all out.
No, exactly. This report, I think it's extraordinarily important. Congratulations on it, actually, Connor, because it's an 8,000-worder. And I wanted to go through with you in some detail because it's the sort of thing that used to be done by newspapers, isn't it? By broadsheets, not really done anymore. I mean, essentially, at the very heart of it, there is this thing I'd never heard of before. So if you can explain what it is. You refer to it as, is it RICU or RICU?
Yes.
Can you explain exactly what this is?
So RICU is the Research, Information and Communications Unit inside the Home Office. It's a very banal acronym, but what you would better understand it as is the Home Office's propaganda or its psychological operations division.
Right.
Some people might have heard of it if they've read Laura Dodsworth's book, State of Fear, because she mentioned it in conjunction with how the government used scare tactics to get us all to comply with lockdown. People remember the big billboards with "look into their eyes and tell them you didn't comply." Similar tactics have been used by RICU ever since around 2011 when it was reformed under the Cameron government. I believe it was set up in around 2007, but in 2011, a chap by the name of Alex Chalk, who was working out in Baghdad on behalf of the British government, a lot of his work still remains classified, but running propaganda efforts on behalf of the Iraq War, he came back and he became the chief of staff to the deputy head of the Conservative Party, or chairwoman of the Conservative Party at the time, Baroness Saida Warsi, and was also appointed the head of RICU. I think he ended around 2016. So he went straight from the Iraq War, running PSYOPs, to come back to run psychological operations on the British public. And what they've done since then is anytime there has been a terror attack, they have run prefabricated newspaper front pages and headlines. They have bussed out imams to the site of the attack to take photos and give speeches. Right. They have run prefabricated hashtags and social media campaigns. And the entire operation is called controlled spontaneity. So they want to give the illusion that this is a spontaneous outpouring of goodwill by both the Muslim community to distance themselves from whatever jihadist has blown up a bus or a pop concert that day, and to say that if you start to question whether or not this attack was avoidable, because the government policy have brought these people into the country, you are fringe, you are far right, you are the racist, and you should be silent because there is an overwhelming level of public consent against you. And they have done these centrally controlled operations pretty much any time this has happened.
So how does it actually work? I mean, if you can take, what was their first a big example of it, if you can think? I mean, would it have been something like maybe the Manchester attacks, or can you explain how it sort of works from the moment of the attack?
So I can use two examples. The first one that I mentioned in the piece is in 2014, there was a British aid worker who was beheaded on camera by ISIS. And the following day, they instructed the Sun newspaper to run a photo of a woman in a Union Jack hijab that was created in conjunction with the Making a Stand campaign. Now, Making a Stand was an anti-jihadist Muslim women's organization. When Home Secretary Theresa May had visited it, the head of it just so happens, had her sister working as a deputy head of RICU. So very strange there. And when FOI requests looked into this, RICU had been monitoring the response to the front page on social media, calling the photo our product. So they had it in the bank for a while. I've also spoken to a chap.
So wait a minute, it was there, waiting to be used?
Yes.
I see. Well, actually, Ollie, we'll have a look at a picture of this. This is a front page of The Sun. actually, from the look of it, yes, you're quite right, Connor, it could really have been used for any kind of attack, couldn't it?
Yes, it was very preemptive. It's almost like they knew that this was going to happen. And so why do they keep importing the group that reliably does this in the first place? I also spoke to a chap who said he used to film these things on behalf of the Home Office. So I have to keep him anonymous because of the Official Secrets Act. But he said he would go out and film, for example, a female Somali football team. Footage of that would be kept in the archives, ready to run as a puff piece anytime this happened, to give the impression of dislocated positive spin for the broader Muslim community. And another example, as you've alluded to, is the Manchester Arena attack. In The Guardian, Lucy Easthope, who is a disaster planner that's worked for the government, wrote that she had been involved in putting out messages of love and resistance anytime a disaster, particularly a terrorist attack, happened. But on reflection, immediately after the Manchester attack, the message of "we will resist" was insensitive and a step too far. So what that means is the government, after British children were killed by an Islamist extremist whose bomb materials were paid for by the benefits the British taxpayer paid, as soon as he had done that, the British government set to work telling the parents, don't look back in anger. That was the prevailing message, and that was centrally coordinated by the British government to tell all of those parents, don't be enraged by the fact that we imported your children's murderer.
Yes, yes. So it's almost like one of these... well, it's not quite, but you know that whole dead cat thing, throwing a dead cat on to distract people's attention. But I remember that with the don't look back in anger, there was something particularly egregious about that, actually. I mean, because it was so sort of appeasing, wasn't it? It was so weak. So that was sort of, even, would the use of the song somehow been suggested? Is that how it would have worked?
Well, we wouldn't have any concrete information on their direct involvement with the concert, but this is something that Freedom of Information requests could find out. Yes. I've been firing those off. Two other examples that might be useful. In 2022, when Valdo Calacane killed Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malley Kumar, and a beloved school caretaker.
And Reading?
This was in Nottingham.
Oh, Nottingham.
Immediately after, there was a large vigil in Nottingham. There were prefabricated banners, Nottingham, one city together. The parents were brought up to say and give speeches, don't have any hate in your heart for race, religion, etc.
Yeah.
Now, it turned out that Valdo Calacane was a schizophrenic murderer. He's obviously in hospital for manslaughter, and people, including Barnaby Webber's own mother, object to that ruling because they think it got off too light. But before we knew the motive, you had religious leaders, including Sikhs and imams, lined up behind the parents, all giving a message of unity, love, and anti-racism. Where did the placards come from? Yes. Why did every newspaper run the exact same? Who coordinated that in conjunction with the city? It's almost like they jumped the gun on that occasion, similar to the Manchester Arena attack. And the other prominent example that people might pick up on was this summer during the Southport protests and riots.
Yeah.
On the 8th of August, newspapers of different ideological persuasions all ran the same front page. Yeah. The Mirror, the Times, the Guardian, the Express. It was all saying a united front to stand up against the far right. And it was a photo of a stand up to racism protest with pre-printed placards it was in London. And this was a protest that had been mobilized against what Nick Lowell's head of Hope Not Hate admitted was a hoax, where there were stories going around of 100 far-right rallies ready to materialize. None of them happened. But it seems like all those stand-up to racism protesters, who we know have received subsidies from the government before, were out there for the photo op. Okay, why did every single newspaper, if they politically disagree, have the exact same characterization, the exact same photos? Well, I sent off a Freedom of Information request in conjunction with my friend, journalist Lewis Bradpool. And on the way over here, the Home Office responded to us. And they said, we had no coordination with the headlines of the piece because that's up to the editorial discretion of the newspapers. A careful sidestep of if they had any involvement in saying you might want to run this particular photo to dampen public tensions. Yeah. So we will be sending a follow-up FOI because these repeated examples of what looks like a coordinated anti-racist message anytime, let's say, children are caught in the crossfire between the government's imported diversity client group and their multicultural policy, anytime that happens, it just seems that these controlled, spontaneous headlines and events seem to happen, and it just gets people's ears all pricked off a little bit.
Do you think people are... did you say, by the way, you've just heard about that? You said on the way over here. It's interesting. Do you think people are generally wise to... Well, let's face it, is manipulation, isn't it? Are they? Do you think they're wiser to that now? I think they are.
Certainly after COVID.
Yeah.
Because you can only disabuse people of the notion that the state has your best interests at heart for so long, because they've been exhausting their credibility on issues like the COVID lockdowns, when not just over Partygate, not just over the COVID WhatsApps, where they said they were trying to deliberately scare people and deploy news about different variants at different times to manufacture consent for lockdown, but also recently with the grooming gangs, for example. I mean, the grooming gangs were treated by RICU recently in a report that Stephen Edgington published, someone who I worked with in conjunction with this report, who's doing absolutely fantastic work. RICU had a report released that even the Labour government ran screaming from, where they were talking about right-wing extremist narratives. And they called the grooming gangs a right-wing extremist narrative.
Really?
As in a hoax that had been perpetuated. They also said that other examples include cultural nationalism, the idea that mass immigration is putting British culture at risk, another conspiracy theory, and two-tier policing, another conspiracy theory.
Yes.
You can only gaslight the population about this for so long and tell them to disbelieve the evidence of their own eyes, when, on the other hand, we just keep seeing Operation Stovewood, the brand new task force that's been set up following Charlie Peters' documentary on GB News by former Home Secretary Suella Braverman, in a single year had identified thousands of prospective victims of the grooming gangs and made 550 arrests. So you have all of this evidence that the government is trying to tell you doesn't actually exist because it's a direct consequence of their policy. I think that's why people are waking up to it.
Direct consequence of their policy, but also... it keeps in place the kind of general narrative, doesn't it? That's the other crucial thing, isn't it? It's not just about, getting out of blame as such, but where does prevent sit in all of this? Presumably, how do they sort of work in any way with this outfit or what?
So RICU is the parent body of Prevent.
Oh, I see.
So Prevent is a subsidiary of RICU. So for those who aren't aware, Prevent is the government's anti-extremism and de-radicalization monitoring body, famous in 2019 because, well, in 2019 they compiled this list. I think it came out as a result of the Shawcross report last year. But they compiled a list of far-right extremist texts. So the sort of thing that would morph you ineluctably into a neo-Nazi. And these included Beowulf, C.S. Lewis, The Lord of the Rings, Douglas Murray, Michael Portillo's Great Western Railway Journeys, and without a hint of irony, George Orwell's 1984. The Quran and Hadiths were not mentioned, funnily enough. And William Shawcross noted this, and he said multiple times in his report into Prevent, it is worth reiterating that Islamic extremism is the majority of the open case files by counter-terror police. It was 80%. Yeah. But at the same time that there were nearly 40,000 Muslims listed on MI5's watch list, which is 1% of the 4 million Muslim population in this country. And I don't think there's any other demographic per capita that has that many terrorists on a watch list. No. He said at the same time that happened, Prevent had only 22% of its referrals in 2021 to 2022 relate to Islamic extremism. Far right was, and they can't define far right properly, was higher. And he said this is woefully disproportionate. Why has this happened? Well, as he notes in his report, groups now proscribed as of January, like Hizb ut-Tahrir, have since 2008 lobbied to say that Prevent is an exercise by the British government to mould and shape the Muslim community and force it to moderate. Now, as we can see with Prevent and RICU, it's completely the opposite. It's acting to do PR against the instincts of the native British public on behalf of Muslims imported and born in this country. And instead, Hizb ut-Tahrir have been responsible for ensuring that Prevent softens its perspective and allows actual Muslim extremists to fall through the cracks. The best example of this is Ali Harbi Ali, the tragic case of Sir David Amos, who was murdered by a Somalian Islamic extremist who had...
the MP, Sir David Amos,
Yeah, he had a Prevent case file. And they just missed his follow-up meetings and allowed him to fall through the cracks. And then he eventually went on to stalk Michael Gove and murder Sir David Amos. The irony of this, by the way, is that this all happened under Conservative government, and it all happened under Michael Gove. There were multiple Conservative higher-ups, even ones I've spoken to, that said that Michael Gove became obsessed with Prevent, trying to carve off parts of this body and assimilate it into his own department of levelling up and communities, and take on a really active role for this. I mean, we remember when he formulated the new extremism definition.
Yes.
And he immediately, as well as saying diversity is our strength in the Commons, he banged on about the far right, as did Rishi Sunak on the steps of Downing Street. He decided to give more emergency security funding to mosques as a response to the Muslim pro-Palestinian October the 7th.
Yes, about 20 million or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, curious then. Why is it consistently that the response to problems created by Islamic extremists is always to tell the British public, shut up and don't notice, and to give more money and power to the Muslim community? Well, again, Stephen Edgington did some investigative work and found there is a 700-strong group of Muslim activists in the Home Office who explicitly work to advance Muslim interests and hire more Muslim staff members. So it's very nepotistic and it's very ideologically driven. And they can get away with this, circumventing the Civil Service Code, telling you to be neutral, by claiming it's work on behalf of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which are defined as, under the Equality Act, politically neutral actions.
So this network, it's not obviously an official network. It's not got a name or anything, or
I can't remember off the top of my head. I think that they do sort of sign a set of pledges when they join it, but
right. So it's sort of like So you have to be a Muslim to be part of it.
I don't think you do actually.
No, right.
I think you just have to sign up to the commitment to say we want to hire more Muslims and we want to represent Muslim interests. So they pull left-wing activists in along with them.
So this is basically 700 in the Home Office alone.
Yes.
I mean, an awful lot becomes clear, does it not? I mean, general immigration policy, for example, as well, when you see these. You mentioned Gove there. I get a slight whisper of disapproval about Gove. What do you see as his general role in this?
Well, as far as I understand, he was very interested in Prevent and influencing it, and I can't see him being a force for good. But I won't solely lay the blame at his feet. This has been something that the Conservative Party, under the, let's say, the long continuity of Cameron right up until Sunak, is guilty of. Baroness Saida Vorsi, obviously, was the chair of the party at the time. And I will reiterate that this is an act of accidental blindness on her part. She liaised with Muslim groups that she often said were, although not illegal, certainly illiberal.
Right.
And these include groups like MEND.
That's the charity, isn't it?
Yes. These include groups. So she was appointing a working group on Islamophobia and fighting Islamophobia. I think it's the working group on anti-Muslim hatred, it was titled, which included people like Nick Lowles of Hope Not Hate and the sister of the deputy head of RICU, and I think Mark Rowley was on there as well, the police commissioner. She had brought in groups into that orbit who themselves had very unsavory characters associated with them. I think it was one of MEN's employees had gone on to praise Jihadi John.
That's right, there's a beautiful young man.
Yes, then left and immediately went to join Cage. Cage, MEND, the Muslim Council of Britain, actually threatened legal action to Michael Gove over his extremism definition, saying that if you pulled groups like us into that definition, we will sue you. So yet again, what you see is a certain softening on the part of politicians like Michael Gove, but because they're susceptible in their liberal sensibilities to be soft in the first place, groups with unsavory affiliations to Muslim extremists then think we can press on the open door and take advantage. So the Conservatives, by being very soft on this, not just on immigration, importing this ethnic and religious clientele block in the first place, but allowing these people to take positions in government and themselves being susceptible to their demands for more of a say and more funding and the like, they have allowed this to happen to us. They're equally as guilty.
Yes. I remember, as you mentioned this, Sunak, on the steps of number 10, but he made it complete equivalence, didn't he? Between it had been after an attack, I believe. This was a while ago, wasn't it? He talked about Islamist extremism and then far right in exactly the same breath. It seems to me, unless I'm missing something, no one can actually give us examples of these far-right people. You know, when they talk about the far-right threat and they're trying to, because I remember going back as far as when I was on the assembly, we had the police coming in and the counter-terrorism people and all of that. And the way, you know, it was the whole thrust was on emphasizing the far right and the new threat. This is the biggest threat. But no one could seemingly give us a name or group or whatever.
Yeah, I find it interesting that one, we're relying on the people to talk about the far right who think that reading Douglas Murray is far right.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Which Michael Gove himself has done, if you just look at his bookshelf in the background of interviews. So the irony of that, he's giving money over to those people. Also, those people are funding groups like Hope Not Hate, who employ a former member of the National Front, who then goes and joins the British Communist Party.
Is it Matthew Collins?
It is, yeah.
I think I wanted to debate with him.
In 2013, he was at a Hope Not Hate event, standing behind a Soviet symbol, saying, Hope Not Hate, brother, comrades, you are our Red Army. Now, the Red Army raped and pillaged their way across Eastern Europe and Germany in the latter part of the Second World War. So all of the people that they're denouncing as far right, as far as I know, Douglas Murray, myself, as they've gone after me, you also in the State of the Hate report, we haven't endorsed any brand of genocidal socialism where Collins has gone from one to the other. So I don't think these people are particularly credible. Yet the Home Office, under the banner of RICU and Prevent and the like, give hundreds of thousands of pounds to Hope Not Hate. They give hundreds of thousands of pounds to the Paul Hanlon Foundation, who then give more to Hope Not Hate as part of their local communities fund. This local communities fund is meant to establish chapters in towns and cities that can dynamically respond anytime there is, let's say, a protest against multiculturalism, mass immigration. So I think we know where all the stand up to racism placards and banners are coming from.
Yes, exactly. I mean, it seems obviously, therefore, that the government finances its own critics or its own enemies, doesn't it?
Well, this ostensibly it's critics and enemies, because you'd expect them not to give money to bullies who are featuring photos of Suella Braverman and Jacob Rees-Mogg and Miriam Cates alongside members from Combat 18. So then you have to wonder, okay, well, whose side are they actually on then if they're giving kickbacks to that? And here's one story I'll tell. I was at a drinks party last year and I spoke to someone in Michael Gove's orbit that had done work for him before. And his quote that I've relayed to Miriam Cates was that Miriam Cates, well, she's more National Socialist than National Conservative. That was the perspective about their own MPs. They believed that Michael Gove was the most conservative member of Parliament, while a backbencher talking about how British women who want more kids need to have more kids, and we should lower immigration in line with our manifesto pledges, is literally Adolf Hitler, according to these people. So this might explain why they seem to be funding who we would think are their enemies, but maybe actually aren't.
It's interesting, isn't it, really, how you've got the civil service, but then you've got these bodies like Hope Not Hate that become sort of almost quasi-civil service. They're all kind of joined at the hip, aren't they? They're all working for the same thing, basically. When you take something like Hope Not Hate, we always call them just a left-wing front, right? It's amazing how they are, quoted as being neutral in the mainstream media. Still after all this time. What do you think their motivation is actually? Well, is it actually far left? Is it far left to undermine our society at any point? Because I remember in the 1970s and 80s, you had these kind of groups that were kind of on the face of it, just perfectly sort of neutral or whatever, but actually they were very hard left.
If you were to hire a Nazi, Peter, they'd call you a Nazi organization.
Yes.
So if they hire communists reliably, I'm going to call them a communist organization. The purpose of a system is what it does. And I find it very curious, though, they're not just a front for the far left, because they were profiled in a 2018 Swedish government report saying that they served a vital role in handing essentially the dossiers of their political enemies to vigilante Antifa groups to put them in the crosshairs. My friend Charles Cornish Dale, for example, went under the moniker Roaring Nationalist, and they decided to dox him and put him at risk. So that's the modus operandi. But it's not just they're a front for the far left, they're a front for the government. They act as an attack dog for the ideological goals of the supposedly neutral civil service. And I think we can see this because two of their operatives have acted in very suspicious ways. We've already mentioned Nick Lowell's. During the summer protests and riots, Nick Lowell spread a hoax, another hoax, about an acid attack on a Muslim woman in Middlesbrough by the Far Way.
Right, yeah.
Now, the Middlesbrough police came out and said, we haven't had any evidence of this. No such thing has happened. This was actually cited by a man who gave an interview as part of the Muslim counter-demonstrators on the same day where in Birmingham they occupied a roundabout, lacerated the liver of a pub goer and slashed the tyres on a Sky News van after interrupting the broadcast. This chap had said, our Muslim brothers and sisters are getting acid attacked. So clearly he'd heard this report from Nick Lowell's. Unlike other people who spread the fake identity of the Southport attacker, spread by a Pakistani national who himself was not charged. Curious. Unlike Bernie Spuffoff, who did that, Nick Lowell's has never received a visit from the police about that. Very weird. Yeah. The other person that Hope Not Hate employs that might have done something strange that we're going to send a Freedom of Information request off about is Harry Shuckman. Harry Shuckman was the ginger chap in, if anyone's had the misfortune of watching it, Hope Not Hate's recent documentary aired on Channel 4. He used a fake passport to pose as an alias Charles Christopher Morton, or Christopher Charles Morton, to the subjects of the documentary. Now, none of the subjects of that documentary were suspected of any criminal activity. So either Shuckman procured this passport fraudulently, which I asked the Met Police about this, I gave multiple follow-up calls, still haven't heard anything back, thought this would be of interest to them because we have proof that he has it from multiple people, or he's procured it with government assistance. Now, again, I don't like to get conspiratorial, but when Hope Not Hate have received government funding, it's not out of the question.
Yes.
So what would the pretext be for the government or an intelligence agency, which Harry Shuckman's grandfather worked for MI6, his father liaised with MI6 while as an editor for the BBC, what pretext would they have to provide someone with that passport to deceive law-abiding members of the public who are not suspected of any crime?
Yes.
But we've got no answers on that. Yeah. And so we just have to suspect the government of funding and assisting far-left agitators who employ communists who want to open our borders and subject us to the exact kind of repeat attacks that they then go on to run PR on behalf of the religion of the attackers.
Yes, no, very well summarized, actually. What's the position with political parties, Connor? I mean, I say that, it's dying on my lips as I say it, but what is the situation with our main parties? Have you actually put this to anyone? I mean, all the work you've done on this, have you actually put it to them?
So, as for the Labour Party, nobody should be surprised that they decided to increase the funding to mosques in the aftermath of the Southport. Now, this was, of course, following the protest in Southport that turned into a riot after the vigil that damaged a mosque. So people thought, oh, okay, that might make sense. But then it starts to look bad with the revelation that Axel Rudabakana had in his possession an Al-Qaeda training manual and the suggestion that he attends mosque while in prison. So people have started to question whether or not that was a prudent act. But do I think the Labour Party are going to take this up? Do I think the government are interested? No. Were the government interested in making an announcement when recent grooming gang convictions gave a group of men in Rotherham well over 100 years in combined sentence?
Yes.
No, but they were very interested in making comments about Greg Wallace.
I know.
His questions.
Just extraordinary.
Yeah, so you would think that they would have better priorities, but there you go. So the government, I won't hold my breath. The Conservative Party, well, Robert Jenrick responded to Stephen Edgington's report about the RICU report that called the grooming gangs a hoax. Robert Jenrick has been consistently strong on this, so I laud him for that. And when I responded to his comments about the article on Twitter, I responded with information about RICU. I responded with a clip from my show, Tomlinson Talks, and explained what RICU have been doing, and this was before the Courage Media report had come out in full. And I said, in your capacity as Shadow Justice Minister, please send some questions off about this. You're fully within your capacity. He liked the tweet.
Right.
So perhaps it's on his radar, I hope.
Yeah.
Other than that, I haven't been contacted by any Conservative ministers or anything about this. As for reform, I would hope that the likes of Rupert Lowe, who is making stellar use of his daily questions allowance, would consider putting in some questions about this in the Home Office specifically, because he can get further than my Freedom of Information request can. Other than that, I haven't been contacted by any of Reform's MPs. I've spoken to some people that might be interested in setting research and policy for them, and then I've said I will forward this to them, but it has not been followed up on since.
Well, okay, while we're waiting, what do you think should happen? I mean, you put some recommendations at the end of your report. What broadly are they?
I think RICU needs to be immediately disbanded. You need an investigation into it, because for over a decade now, they have waged psychological warfare operations on the tax-paying, law-abiding people of this country against their express democratic consent to see immigration reduced in every election since 2010. So you need an investigation into exactly what they've done. And I think at this stage, you need a kind of truth and reconciliation committee about it, to have full transparency, to regain any semblance of democratic legitimacy in the British government. You then need to completely overhaul Prevent. You need to reconfigure the parameters with which they monitor far right. Let's just say neo-Nazi, because that's what they mean there. Far right is a broad and catch-all term. Far left, because they're certainly not monitoring communist agitation nearly well enough. In that report around the grooming gangs being a grievance narrative, by the way, they listed under far right ideologies anti-communism.
House of Commons?
Anti-communism.
Anti-communism.
Yes. So they listed anti-communism as a far right belief. So that's why they're not monitoring it. And of course, Islamic extremism. We need someone to completely overhaul the monitoring criteria, who is doing the monitoring and that in Prevent. And I think they need to correspond with a broad range of academics to do that, other than their obviously narrow pool of consultants currently. I mean, if they're literally going to the sister of the deputy head of RICU, it's very nepotistic. And then you also need to reform things like the Charities Act to ensure that organisations like Hope Not Hate that are working on behalf of political parties. I mean, bear in mind, you had a Labour baroness, Ruth Smeeth, who was curiously listed as an intelligence asset in a US Intel communique back in the 2010s. She was sat on their board right up until Labour had just won the election. You've now got multiple Labour MPs that have given Hope Not Hate a parliamentary group. And one of them is on the all-parliamentary working group for British Muslims, who formulated that nonsensical Islamophobia definition that you gave them on before, Peter. So not only does that parliamentary group need to be disbanded, but the Charities Act needs to be completely overhauled to ensure groups like the Paul Hamlin Foundation and that can't get kickbacks from the Home Office for political activity. You also need to ensure that all of the civil servants who have been doing this cannot ever get a job in government again, and that they are sacked. Preferably without pay, but that's going to be very difficult to do because they get a year's severance pay. And you would need to overhaul quite a bit of legislation to make that happen, because the moment that you suggest they be sacked, they're going to appeal to the Equality Act. So that has to go too. The Constitutional Reform Act probably needs to go, because that's what's corrupted civil servants. There are so many things that need to happen just to rip the rot out of the Home Office. And I do wonder if any political party, being very agnostic on which, has the awareness of what needs to happen and the courage to do so.
This is the point, really, isn't it? Because, you said at the beginning there, you've effectively find it a duty. It's a duty to you to look into this and to basically point out how appallingly we are governed, and I would say actually how treacherously we're governed. But will it always be for you? Nothing wrong with that. Will it always be writing? Will it always be that? Or would you never think of actually getting into the fray yourself, Connor Tomlinson?
I've been asked this question before. I've turned down the prospect so far. It's not something I want to do. I'm also, again, I'm 26. I've only just got my first house. I'm getting married next year. We're starting having kids next year. This is the reason this is on my radar so much, actually, because I don't want my kids growing up in a country like this.
Yes.
It's appalling. Yeah. I don't know what kind of culture they're going to be subjected to. The brainwashing that's coming out of the government is very, very. I don't see it in my future. Certainly not my immediate future. And there are certain figures like Douglas Murray who haven't needed to enter the House of Commons in order to have a fantastic impact on discourse. And also, I feel like if I'm not doing the research, then I don't know necessarily who will. There's a few brilliant people like Charlotte Gill and Stephen Edgington and Charlie Peters and the like. But actual journalists, as you've said, you could basically count on one hand at this point.
Well, they almost don't really exist anymore. I mean, like Charlotte Gill has done all that woke research, into the sheer waste of taxpayers' money, for example. I totally agree. Just like what you've done with this. No, I just suppose the reason I'm asking is that, if you go back to like a few decades, journalism was one thing, always open to people who were politically very passionate. But then it almost sort of used to follow that actually, no, we're going to actually get involved electorally. But I don't see it, and not just you, but I don't see it amongst a lot of the bright younger people in their 20s who are writing and commentating. I don't see, do you? Am I not seeing it? Do you see these figures? It seems to me that there is this real gap now between people who are doing this kind of stuff and therefore come on shows like this, and then people who want to get active in politics. I can't think of any really bright young people getting involved. You sort of think, yes, of course, now keep your eye on that one or that one, because they might be good.
I know some who would be eligible and eager to do so, but I think the reason you're seeing so many young people who, off the merits of their own research acumen, are getting involved in media commentating politics is because the avenues are currently open. There's no gatekeepers. There are a few on broadcast media, but if you're thinking about new media startups like the Culture Forum or the Lotus Eaters or Courage Media, the drawbridge has not been drawn up. Traditional political parties are very distrustful of young people involved in politics who they see as rogue elements and incapable to rein them in with message discipline. I don't think they trust them yet. And so I think the reason that young people aren't eager is because we've been told no from the outset. I think that might change over time, but until it does, I think you're going to see a lot of people percolating around my sphere. And also, I think I'll stick with what I'm good at for the time being, and I don't want to tread on anyone else's toes. But if I might just touch on the point of treachery. Keir Starmer, about 2 weeks ago now, when Tahir Ali got up and said, "Do we need an Islamophobia blasphemy law?"
Yeah.
He gave credence to the idea. He sat down, I think it was on Eid, with Sadiq Khan to do a very ego-massaging interview saying we need to tackle Islamophobic hate in all its forms. For those who don't know, just to put it into perspective, Islamophobia was a word invented by the Muslim Brotherhood. It was popularized in this country by a Runnymede Trust report in the same year that Tony Blair became Prime Minister. But a former jihadist who has reformed and became a whistleblower came out and said he was present at a meeting where members of a Muslim Brotherhood front group said, well, we've seen how gay rights activists have been so successful in the US and Europe by using the term homophobia. We need to stigmatize criticism of Islam with a similar phrase. So anyone perpetuating the idea that criticism of a religious ideology, which has some really heinous things in the hadiths, and is directly connected to being the ideology which inspires the most terror around the world and in the UK. Anyone perpetuating the idea that to criticize that as an irrational hatred is doing the bidding of the worst kind of global terrorists. And so treachery is an apt way to frame it.
Well, yes, or even on the only reason I hesitate slightly sometimes is because treachery requires a belief in an idea of a nation that you can actually be treacherous against. And I don't think that they have any idea of a nation, particularly these people in charge.
Well, they have the idea of a sort of global airport lounge where everyone's made to play nice by a government which surveils you all the time. But the issue is, with multiculturalism, even national or global, is they think of it as a melting pot. They think that if you just add all the elements, no matter how indigestibly hostile to liberal, secular capitalism, that they'll all just melt and you'll get this sort of refined metal. Instead, it's more like a blender. They're trying to hit blend, and the least digestible element, which is imported Islamic extremists, leave the bitterest of aftertaste. So whether or not their loyalties lie to a sort of John Lennon imagined global utopia without offense or the nation state, they're still selling both upriver, because the imported Muslim element, which are working to wage a long march for the institutions, don't care about the British nation state or this global utopia. They just care about the advance of the Ummah. And any political party who thinks that they can appease this element in any way, shape or form is delusional.
Actually, on that point as well, just by way of ending, been talking about the Home Office. By the way, actually, before, where can people actually see it? It's courage.media.
It's courage.media.
Courage.media, where you can read this whole report. If you take the Home Office, maybe it needs someone to be a bit enterprising here, but they have this one duty, don't they, to basically ensure the safety of citizens of this country. Could they not be sued for actually being negligent about the safety of people in this country?
I don't know what the legal mechanisms would be, but I think that given you would be going up against a government department who are using your own money to fight you, I think all the odds are stacked against you. What I think we need is a political force with sufficient courage to say, the Home Office as it stands will be disbanded. We will keep the building, we will sack basically everyone, and we will rebuild it in spirit with staff that we have been training who are not culpable for these kinds of atrocities all this time. And we will have a very small immigration department, because we're planning to let a lot fewer people in, a department of deportations for legal criminals. And also, if we are going to have a prevent body, it properly calibrates the parameters which warrant monitoring extremism. And it does that with credible academics across the spectrum. I am not hearing that as of yet, but I hope that continuing to talk about these issues puts this as a priority on their radar.
Well, look, well done on that report, Connor. And congratulations, by the way. Deprogram seems to be going well, doesn't it?
I'm enjoying it very much, Peter.
Yeah.
So much for bringing
So your show, your Lotus Eaters, your main show. I mean, you've had this past year. You had Liz Truss on, didn't you?
Yes, it caused quite a stir.
Yeah. Have you got any big ones lined up?
We'll see in the new year. It'll be good fun. But again, that's a perfect example. Jess Phillips is the Home Office Minister. She made more of a song and dance about Liz Truss coming on my show for a week on Sky News than she has about the grooming gangs.
Yeah. There you go. Thanks very much, Connor. That's it for this week. And, we shall see you next time. In the meantime, do have a healthy and happy and prosperous week, won't you? Okay, take care. Bye. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.